Hey, what's going on, everybody? So in this section, what we're going to do is we are going to discuss counter questions. Now, to start things off, when somebody asks you a question, what do you think you naturally do? And for most people, it's to answer that question, right? If somebody says, hey, why did you come to school late? Or hey, why did you wake up late? Or hey, why did you do that? The natural thing to do is just to answer right away. However, there are a lot of challenges to this, especially when it comes to sales. And that's what we're going to tackle here. And we're going to also show you a solution on how you can change the situation so that you can use questions to your advantage, especially when somebody is asking you that question. Now, let's go ahead and give you an example first. So, counter question, right? So if a potential customer is interested in buying your product or service and they're going to ask you, how much is it? And you say, it's only $5,000. And the potential customer will say, hey, that's just way too expensive, out of my budget, buy. And then you say, wait, hold on, we could work something out. But then by then, the customer's turned off because the price is too high and the deal is done. Now, this happens to a lot of people who are starting out in sales, right? Because in your head, you might be thinking $5,000 is a great deal for them. But in their heads, they may not think so, right? Everybody has a different perspective on what the price should be. And especially for situations where the price is too much more higher than them, they just can't afford it and they're just going to walk away. This is not what you want to do, because you need to figure out whether or not someone has a budget before you offer them a price. And so this is an example of someone failing at using counter questions. Some more examples of this before I give you the solution is that, let's say you are a guy and you have a girlfriend and she says, hey, does this outfit make me look fat? And obviously, if you say yes, it's not good. If you say no, they might say you're lying. So you have to understand the intent behind the ask it before you answer the question, right? Instead of just answering questions directly like we are trained to do in just human everyday culture, what you want to do is you want to answer somebody's question with another question to understand their intent. Understand why they're asking that question so that you can really get into the heart of their emotion and intent. And then from there, once you fully understand where they are coming from, then you can answer the question. But if you do not understand these things, then do not answer the question with a statement. You want to answer their question with a question and learn a little bit more on why they asked it. So key notes when it comes to answering questions with questions, and that is you want to gain as much insight as possible before you answer the question. Like I said before, understand why they asked the question and their intent. If you're unsure why someone asked the question, then just ask them, right? If you're guessing in your head like, I wonder why this person asked, instead of guessing, you just got to ask. And by doing this, you're gaining control and controlling the flow of the conversation, right? And typically when people ask you something and you want to answer that question with a counter question, meaning you're answering their question with a question, you might have to do it 3 times before they actually get to the root of the intent of why they even asked in the first place. So let's go ahead and give you some examples of counter questions so you have some application on how you can use it. So the prospect says, how much does it cost, right? And before in the example, I just kind of threw out the price and said it's $5,000 and the deal was done. But in this situation, what you can say is, I'd be happy to help you, but before we go ahead and get into that, do you have a budget or range you're working with? And so now you turn it back on the prospect where they might say like, if a range, I'm not really sure, but maybe, $1,000 to $4,000, right? So instead of just throwing out your number, which is $5,000, you understand that it's 1 to 4, and then you can kind of play with their range and adjust your pricing so that, hey, if it's 1 to 4, let's try to give them 4 and see how that works, right? So a lot of ways you can play using that information, but you got to answer their question with a question before you can even get that information to begin with. Another example, prospect says, does this integrate with Salesforce, right? Let's say you're selling a software and maybe your product does integrate with Salesforce, maybe it doesn't. But before you even answer yes or no, you could say, well, how important is the integration with Salesforce for your business? And the prospect might say, it's 100% important, because if it doesn't integrate with Salesforce, we're not going to do the deal. And then you can kind of adjust what you say from there. But if they say it doesn't matter, then maybe your integration is not that good with Salesforce. And you say, well, we do have an integration. However, it's not the best, but if you want to make it work, we can make it work, right? So you can change what you say and how you answer their question depending on what they say and what information they give you back when you answer their question with a counter question. Another example, prospect just says, he's in an angry state. He says, are you trying to rip me off? And you could say, that's interesting you asked that. Is there something I did to make you feel that way? right? Totally reversing the situation where the average person would probably say, I'm not trying to rip you off. This is a great deal. You should take it, right? It's like you're pushing back when they're pushing, and that just leads to a lot of conflict and friction. But if you want to be a little bit more fluid in what you're saying and how you're asking it, instead of defending yourself or instead of telling them what to do, you answer their question with a question, and you're saying, that's really interesting you asked that. Is there something I did to make you feel that way? And they might say, yeah, there is something you did, and they'll tell you, right? And then whatever they say, you say, oh, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. I didn't mean it, right? And you continue the conversation from there. However, if you just defend yourself and you fight back, then it just doesn't lead to a good situation, right? So you gotta use questions to understand someone's intent, get more information, and then continue the conversation and get them to eventually buy whatever it is that you're selling. And a simple way to think about it is when you're answering questions right away with statements and you're not really looking for intent, you're putting yourself in a box. You're putting yourself in a situation where, you say something that offends the other person, and in the other person's head, they're going to think, I was right. This guy's just trying to sell me. He's wasting my time. That's exactly where you do not want to be. And that's where most salespeople end up. So instead, you want to do the opposite of what everybody else is doing and answer their questions using more questions. And again, the reason why this is so powerful is because when you ask questions, you control the flow of the conversation. Whoever is in control is going to control the deal, the time, and everything. So if you can control that, you're that much more closer to becoming a better seller. And with that said, that's everything we have to cover when it comes to counter questions. Again, it is a powerful tool that you can use in any situation throughout your entire sales cycle, whether it's the first meeting or maybe it's your multiple meetings in. You can always answer questions using questions to understand intent, because once you understand intent, you become a lot more empathetic for the other side. And then from there, you build that rapport and people are going to trust you more. And obviously, it's easier for them to make that buying decision. All right, guys, now that we covered how you can use counter questions, I'm going to go ahead and see you guys in the next section.